One of the great things about doing my podcast has been it is an excellent opportunity to stir up trouble. This is my favorite story ever. She comes over to me, she says, I have read everything you've ever written and I have disagreed with everything you've ever said. And I thought, that's perfect. Normally an audiobook is just someone reading into a microphone. We want to use audio in a new way and create an experience. I am obsessed with Maxine. I went to visit her. People were like running out of stores. They were grabbing their kids. It was mind-blowing.
Hey family, welcome to the show. Today we're bringing you one of the biggest, boldest, and brightest thinkers on the planet. That's right, Malcolm Gladwell's returning to the show. Also today, we're going to shine a light on our most recent Real Talk, Real Change special. We produced it in collaboration, of course, with our good friends at Chevrolet. In fact, we're going to give you a highlight from that just a little later in the show. But first, Malcolm Gladwell is an English-born Canadian journalist. He's been a staff writer at The New Yorker since 1996 and has published seven, highly acclaimed books, including, of course, the wildly popular Blank, Outliers, and The Tipping Point. I recently sat down with him at this year's OZY Fest, and frankly, the conversation was so incredible, so timely, that we decided to give it the Carlos Watson Show treatment. So without further ado, enjoy my time with the intellectual troublemaker and my friend, Malcolm Gladwell. Malcolm, we started off there calling you intellectual troublemaker. I think I kind of like that for you. What is the best title, best moniker anybody's given you?
I think that might be it. I think I like doing a little mischief. One of the great things about doing my podcast the last couple of years has been it is an excellent opportunity to stir up trouble.
When did you arrive at a meaningful level of confidence?
If we were talking to each other 30 years ago, would I be as confident? Probably not. It's a lot easier if you're my age and you've been doing it for 30 years. I know I have an audience of people who will listen to me and not necessarily agree with me, but who will listen to me, who are curious about what I have to say, and that once you know you have an audience, this is my favorite story ever. I'm in a coffee shop in Houston, and a fancy part of Houston, and this woman drives up in a Range Rover with full-on, white matron of Houston, right? She sees me, she comes over to me, she says, you Malcolm Gladwell? I said, yes. She goes, I have read everything you've ever written, and I have disagreed with everything you've ever said. And I thought, that's perfect, right? How can you not get confidence from that? She doesn't need to agree with me to want to listen to my podcast or read my books. She's quite happy just exploring along with me. When you get that kind of feedback, that makes a big difference.
And I love that it happened in Houston. I've become convinced that Houston is one of the unique breeding grounds of extraordinary American talent and kind of classic American talent.
I thought you were going to say Atlanta.
Atlanta?
For some time that Atlanta is in the best sense of the word, that is the future of America.
Oh, interesting. Why is Atlanta on your top of your list as the future?
Atlanta is, of course, Spelman, Morehouse, Clark. Yeah. You have the gold standards of that. And so what you have is a center of Black intellectual life and culture and learning that goes back generations. And that's a huge advantage. The only state like it is Washington, D.C., where you can walk into any restaurant or whatever in Atlanta and you will see, it's, I think, of one of the most perfectly integrated cities in the country, in a sense that you're not surprised when half the restaurant's Black and half the restaurant's white. In Atlanta, you're not going to be shocked if your, pediatrician is Black, or your brain surgeon is Black, or your professor of physics is Black. There's a kind of level of confidence in the way people from different backgrounds mix there that I love. I had a conversation with, Kenya Barris, who does Blackish.
Blackish has been telling it like it is.
Hey! Who went to Clark, of course, went to school in Atlanta, an LA guy who goes to Atlanta. And he was talking about what it meant to have Spike Lee go to Morehouse and how Spike Lee comes out of Morehouse and basically gives a whole generation of African-American creative people in this country confidence. They're like, oh, this guy just went there and came out and just started doing his own incredibly original thing. And the world loved him for it.
I don't even know how you got this far. You're weak. I'm cooking the Cocoa Puffs. I ain't pledging no virgin.
Spike Lee kind of refreshed the image and the excitement about HBCUs. So who else, in terms of cities, for whatever combination of reasons, do you think about either as magical cities of the moment, or you think about special cities of the future.
I would be remiss if I didn't mention Toronto, which is sort of an obvious one. But I mean, as a, raised in Canada, I have to have a sweet spot. It's a city that's grown up inside of the Canadian experiment. So an experiment that's much more egalitarian, that's much more sort of naturally inclusive, that has brought together, Toronto is a crazy mix of people from around the world. I mean, you can find everyone in Toronto. And that's sort of, and inside of a society that's prioritized things like, just simple things like, it's affordable to go to college. You don't have to pay for your health care. There's all those kinds of things which just make it a lot easier for people to live their lives. I think there's real magic there. So many Jamaicans in Toronto. I mean, it's unbelievable. Yes. There are parts of Toronto where you just think, wait a second, am I in Kingston or am I in... It's very, very confusing.
Yeah. Well, Toronto has not only the Caribbean population, but they have a meaningful Indian population.
Oh, too. And also Chinese, Hong Kong Chinese, and also, you could go on. Yes, but it has a really, really large East Asian population.
It's still the night shift, just brighter. Still a night out, but everything fits in. Chevrolet, making life's journey just better.
You open, even for me, the brother, the son, the grandson of HBCU graduates. You opened even fresh thinking for me. Say more about that on Revisionist History.
Yeah, so Revisionist History, 2 episodes are all about an HBCU in New Orleans called Dillard University. I make the case that Dillard it's really an extraordinary school, like so many HBCUs, and does all of these interesting things, important things in the African-American community that no one else is doing. But then I asked the question, if this is such a good school, why is its ranking on the US News college rankings so low? So it's this critique of the way we assess quality in higher education. We basically are measuring all the wrong things. And these schools that are doing these amazing things they're getting dissed by the rankings. And it might seem like a small thing, but it's a reflection of our values. And Carlos, I think that, you know this as well as I do, there are some symbolic things in our society that reflect our deeply held positions and our values on things. A lot of these HBCUs should be at the top of the rankings. They're doing insane things. With low tuition, with very few resources, they are graduating incredible numbers of people in STEM fields. They are graduating students at rates far higher than equivalent schools, and they're not getting the kind of love from the rest of society that they deserve. And I want to figure out why. Let's face it, the higher education game in this country is about money. Everything flows from how much money can you raise. You're an HBCU, you go out and you're competing with other schools for a limited pool of cash from basically wealthy Americans. It is a lot harder to make your case when no one's heard of you and no one considers you prestigious, right? And a lot easier if you're recognized for what you do. So we're not just talking about bragging rights. This goes to the core of their ability to carry out their mission.
Malcolm, one of the things I've always appreciated about you, and I know very few people who do this, most of us, whether we're talking about education, sports, finance, government policy, for whatever combination of reasons, we are not programmed to say, wait, is this even set up properly? Where does that come from with you?
You and I are both have a good bit of Jamaican in us. Yeah. We know about what it means to be a disputatious West Indian. My dad was in the best sense of the word, a subversive. He didn't really care what the world told him he should think. He went out and thought his own thoughts and did his own thing. And that was a very good example growing up. It really does help to have parents who make their own way in the world,
What's been your biggest 2 or 3 takeaways from the last year?
I've just come out with this new book called The Bomber Mafia, this story from the Second World War. It's an audiobook and a regular print book as well. And I got immersed in the culture of the Air Force when I was doing this. In the middle of last summer, when things were craziest, the Air Force had a changeover. The guy who ran the Air Force, a guy named General Goldfein, retired, and he was replaced by General Brown.
I'm committed to the Air Force achieving irreversible momentum towards implementation of the National Defense Strategy and an integrated and more lethal joint force.
And General Brown is the first African-American to head the Air Force in its history. At the time he took over, the Secretary of the Air Force was a woman, the second woman in the history. And there was a changeover ceremony that was conducted with dignity and thoughtfulness, with a deep sense of history, a group of people who came together because they love their country and they wanted to defend their country. And they were peacefully handing over responsibility to a new generation of leaders. And the speeches were insane. They were funny, they were warm. At one point, the Secretary of the Air Force broke into tears. And then you get this new guy comes in who is, has a kind of dignity and graciousness about him.
I'm simply in awe today. This backdrop behind me, and when the color guard started marching in, I realized this is for real.
And the whole thing, I was just sitting there, and I had the attitude, like many of us, really despairing for the American experiment last summer. And then I watched this thing and I felt, you know what, we're gonna be okay. There are parts of this country that work amazingly well, even in times of crisis. I mean, it blew me away. And it just restored my faith. And I have been optimistic ever since.
And do you think you would have sustained that optimism if President Trump had won a second term?
My 89-year-old mom in Canada, who has never lived in the United States, Jamaican by birth, she would have been so angry if Trump won.
It's still the night shift, just brighter. Still a night out, but everything fits in. Chevrolet, making life's journey just better.
I've obviously read Bomber Mafia, but for those who haven't read, would you give them 30 seconds just so they know the magic that awaits? What's the story about?
It's a story about a small group of pilots in central Alabama in the 1930s who think they can reinvent war.
They thought that the way that wars were fought made no sense, and there was a way to conduct military affairs that left far fewer people killed and left far less of a scar on the countries involved.
And they are these idealists who take this idea into the Second World War and try and reform war from the middle of that intense conflict. And it's a story of what happens. It's a crazy story with like wild geniuses and crazy scientists at Harvard. And it's heartbreaking at the end what happens, because they bring this crusade right to the very climax of the war.
I'm telling this story in the context of the Second World War, but I mean, look around you. This is a question that's at the heart of 100 things I feel like we encounter in the present day.
It's delicious, folks, and you have to listen to it. Even though I love Malcolm, don't read it. Get the audio feast. I think you did something special over the last year, just to toot your horn for a minute, which is, while we're calling it a book, I think more sumptuous than the written word is what you've called an audiobook, which I don't even know that fully does it justice. And it feels like when you and I talked several years ago and you were just beginning this podcasting journey and building this company with Jacob called Pushkin, and obviously bringing alive not only revisionist history, but other podcasts as well. Was there a purposeful intention in weaving together those different storytelling
Absolutely.
types?
The idea was that we want to use audio in a new way. Normally an audiobook is just someone reading into a microphone. That seems crazy to us. I wanted to tell the story from the Second World War, this insane story that ends in the bombing of Japan in 1945. And we have all of this tape, archival tape. We have tape of the battles. We have the sound of the engines.
The Empire has run out of time. Target, Hiroshima, a city of 350,000 people.
All these generals in the Second World War, we have these hours and hours and hours of them talking.
The British, Chinese, and United States governments have given the Japanese people adequate warning of what is in store for them.
And the idea is we could bring all that together along with interviews of historians in the present day looking back on this and create an experience. And that was the idea. That it's quite unlike, I will say this immodestly, it is quite unlike any other audiobook you will ever encounter. You can just, go get it at, bombermafia.com, and it's wild. Now we're doing one on the LAPD. We're gonna do one on the history of American policing, the same way. So I wanna get all of these voices. I am obsessed with Maxine.
I'm always cautiously optimistic, and I'm very pleased that we got the guilty verdict that we did.
The whole thing about her is her voice.
We're afraid to have our young people in particular out on the streets. They will be stopped, and they are afraid of the police.
The one of 13 kids
comes to LA, self-created, starts out working as a seamstress in a garment factory, climbs the ladder. And so she's part of the story. Who was going after the LAPD in the 1960s when no one else had the courage? Maxine Waters was part of that band. There was a small band of African Americans in that city who took on the most powerful police force in the country. She was front and center. And you have to hear her to understand.
She'll say to me, Carlos, I'm not new to this.
I am outraged. I think there has been a miscarriage of justice.
Oh, she's not new to this.
and she means that across a whole series of things.
I went to visit her 2 or 3 years ago. We were in her district in South Central. We were walking down the street. You would have thought she was John the Baptist. People were running out of stores. They were grabbing their kids. She was mobbed. It was mind-blowing.
We're living in a moment with people like Fauci, Pelosi, Waters, Biden. It's such an interesting moment here, whether we will end up recalibrating how we think about age and how we think about seniority and wisdom, because we do have quite a set of interesting people in their late 70s and 80s who are really absolutely critical on the world stage.
I worry a little bit about that. I love that Maxine has been around forever. That's really important. But if everyone is in their 80s, you're not creating a new generation of leaders.
Malcolm, thank you and gracias.
Thank you, Carlos.
Good to see you. Be safe.
Yeah.
Hey, I hope you enjoyed that conversation with Malcolm. Always has big, bold ideas. Love what he said about Atlanta as the city of the future, the city to watch. Really appreciated the way he made me think about HBCUs, saying that if we really judge them fairly, we might think about them as among the top schools in the country and think about all the research dollars and other opportunities that would flow with it. Something to think about as we move forward. Listen, now as promised, we've got a highlight to share with you from our most recent Real Talk, Real Change special, which of course we made in collaboration with our good friends at Chevrolet. Now, if you haven't seen these specials, you gotta check them out. We've had bold conversations about powerful racism found in some of America's greatest institutions and ideals, from healthcare to education, and indeed the very idea of the American dream. Now, our latest special explores wealth inequity in America, and it's a truly powerful piece of work. Take a look. You're watching Real Talk, Real Change, brought to you in collaboration with our friends at Chevrolet. We're exploring the wealth gap in this country and the business of being Black.
You have to talk about how we repair the economic devastation.
I can go through all these things that helped Americans build generational wealth, but Blacks were left out.
There's never been a time in American history where we've gotten fair and adequate housing or fair and adequate employment.
There's no equality, and we have to work towards social justice.
We have a long way to go, and it's not the fault of Blacks.
We haven't been taught investments, stock market, how to create wealth.
There is no education that comes with money in the Black communities. It doesn't.
We are in a state of emergency. We can do this, but we have to do it together.
How do you see cryptocurrency?
I want in on it.
Studies show the estimated median wealth of Black households is $24,000, while white households sit at $189,000.
Race has been the engine that has driven so many economic decisions made by this country.
Everyone's free, no one's free. That's just a fact.
Everything we want, we have to get a group of white people to say they deserve it.
Do you think it will change?
We want to talk about the greatest wealth transfer in history. We can actually participate it by creating it ourselves. And that is power.
Hey, that was a highlight from Real Talk, Real Change, which of course is out now. Be sure to check it out. And as always, a big thank you to our good friends at Chevrolet. And of course, a big thank you to all of you for joining us here today. Hey, by the way, we've got a little fun news here. Guess who's going to be hosting the News and Documentary Emmys? I'm proud to say I'm going to get that opportunity. Don't miss it. September 29th, my birthday. Come join me. We're going to have a little bit of fun. See you soon.